Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know it's really hot in here, and I'm sorry. Hopefully a breeze will come through. On behalf of the family, I want to thank you for being here and supporting them. And our program today will start with the video. Then we will have words from Ayumi, Timothy, and Richard. So if there's anything I can do for anybody, if somebody needs water, flag me down, and I'll bring you a glass of water since it's so hot. Thank you.
Thank you for coming for today. Who would imagine that I'm reading a eulogy for my husband, Rob, today? We just became empty nesters a year ago, and we were talking about how we should spend the rest of our life. It was so sudden and unexpected. Rob and I met in Osaka, 1990. I still remember the place where we met. It's called Studebakers, which was a 1950 theme nightclub. There was a shiny red open-top Studebaker in the middle of the nightclub. Rob was there with his Iranian friend, and I was there with my colleagues. We were both drunk, of course. His Japanese was not so great back then, and my English was almost zero. But somehow we felt something for each other. Later, he invited us to visit his office. I don't know if he wanted to impress me, but it worked because he had his own room on the top floor of the consulate looking over Midosuji, which is like Manhattan's Fifth Avenue in Osaka, all by himself. I was a stockbroker and I was working with 50 colleagues on the same floor. So I thought, wow, this guy must be somebody very important. Later, I found out that he had that office not because of him, but that secret floor was mainly for his colleague who had some secret job. We dated over for about 2 years, and finally, I invited him to visit my parents' house. I'm from a tiny town where everybody knows each other. The day he came to my parents' house was August 15th, which was the end of the war anniversary for Japan. My grandmother didn't speak to him at all, but my grandfather didn't mind about this American. When he was leaving, my grandmother asked if he wanted to take the melons she grew. That was her acceptance gesture. In 1994, we had a traditional Japanese wedding in my hometown. His mother and sister were very brave to attend it. There were only 3 Americans who attended his side. My family and relatives got drunk, sang karaoke, and danced during the wedding. His mom and sister might have regretted flying over to Japan for that. Luckily, Rob's former boss, Consul General in Osaka, who was attending the wedding, helped them explain. Again, his mom was so brave, and she did a really nice speech, and Rob interpreted. We lived in Bonn, Germany, then Newport, Rhode Island, where he studied at Naval War College. After that, we were stationed in Okinawa. He was the youngest consul general ever at that time, and I was also the youngest spouse. So everybody thought I was his interpreter or secretary. He really enjoyed his job. We met so many interesting people, including a Canadian professor who is also a diver and loves to drink. We started a club called Snake Club with the local business people. To join the club, you must be born in the year of the snake. Yes, Rob and I were both snakes. This club still continues between the local business people and every consul general after Rob. He became the master of bowing because every time the US military personnel caused problems, he had to see the governor and apologize in front of the local media. At first, his bows were terrible. I then taught him how to make a proper 90-degree bow, and the locals ended up recognizing him for having a better bow than the 3-star Marine general. President Clinton even came to Okinawa and told Rob, the consul general in Okinawa must have been a tough job. Rob later told me at the time, he thought, it's not as hard as yours. Ambassador Thomas Foley, who was a spoken native, also liked Rob. He made so many trips to Okinawa, and Rob even made him take a diving license. Because of his diving license, or I'm not sure, but Ambassador Foley helped Rob get a job in Paris after Okinawa. Paris was wonderful, no doubt. But the most wonderful thing is that our son, Timothy, was born in Paris 2 years after we moved to Paris. Rob quickly became a proud dad. 2 days after Tim was born, he brought the whole female colleagues to the hospital and had them hold Tim. One time, he called me from the ambassador's reception and asked me to bring Tim. He said, everybody wants to meet Tim. I said, no. But he insisted in bringing him. Finally, I had to bring him to the residence. Tim was only 1 month old, and that was That was his debut for the official parties. Rob avoided taking any positions in DC. We moved to Taipei for a year, refreshing the Chinese language course after Paris, then moved to Beijing. People understand that we extended our 3-year tour in Paris to 4 years. We did the same thing in Beijing and Tokyo. He really enjoyed working with the locals. Of course, his bowing skill got better and better while we were in Asia. While we were in Tokyo, my family called Rob half a second guy because whenever some officials came from DC, he was always behind the person on the TV news. My parents really enjoyed spotting him on the news. During his term in Tokyo, Rob attended an hour-long political program on a major TV station. My parents were so proud of him and asked all of our relatives to watch it. His mom and sister visited whenever we moved, and his brother and his family also visited Paris. When his niece stayed with us in Tokyo, he took her to his office and was so happy that everybody said to him, "I didn't know you had such a cute niece." He served his country for 32 years. He was fluent in Chinese and Japanese, and also he spoke German and French, which helped his wine hobby. I had no doubt that he was getting another job after he retired. So when he retired in 2014, I was annoyed that he had no intention to work. In Japan, wives say, "Teishu genki de rusu ga ii," meaning the best husbands are healthy, hard workers and don't stay home at all. Anyway, we picked the Seattle area to retire. His uncle and his family were here, and we wanted Tim to experience a big family feeling, since his parents were already gone. They let us be invited to holidays, weddings, and many fun events, and we were so fortunate. We rented an apartment in Bellevue and looked for our first house. We looked and looked at over 100 houses. I wanted a house with an ocean and mountain view. Rob said that it would be hard with our budget, but one day his old friend Ted suggested expanding a search in Vashon. No bridge, but there was a house with an ocean view and mountain view at the north end. This house actually has a 180-degree view of the Olympics, the Cascades, and Mount Baker. We moved to Vashon in December 2014. Since then, we have never regretted living here. Wonderful school, wonderful neighbors, wonderful friends, and nature. There was a couple who also retired from the State Department in Vashon, and we became good friends. The other couple from Rob's first tour in the Taipei era were also frequent visitors from Bellingham. He enjoyed skiing, jogging, and diving. Of course, we get frustrated when we missed the 9:25 boat by 5 minutes and had to wait for another 1 hour for the next ferry. Tim made many friends here. We were so happy to see him adjusting here since he had to move every few years and never lived in the States, US until 12 years old. Rob never missed Tim's football and lacrosse games. He even flipped burgers at high school football game concessions. He was so proud of Tim that his lacrosse team won the state championships in 2019. He also enjoyed working with Tim as a lifeguard. I don't think Tim liked it very much when they got the shift together. When I think of the last year of his life, there were signs that he was leaving us. 10 days after we sent him off to a college in New Orleans last August, he came back for a few weeks because Hurricane Ida hit New Orleans. So Tim was able to celebrate Rob's last birthday in September. His childhood friend and his wife also visited in the same month, and they were telling stupid childhood stories to Tim. Trip to Palm Springs, a ski trip to Denver with his cousin's family, another ski trip to Whistler, where he enjoyed glacier. Then the New Orleans Jazz Festival. He was supposed to see the Rolling Stones a year earlier, but it was canceled. So he was so excited about this trip with his best friend Craig. Rob insisted that I should go too. We enjoyed meeting Tim's friends. Rob told me that I pushed him to go to Tulane, so I was worried if he would like it here. But I'm so happy that he loves everything and he's surrounded by many friends. He went to pick up his wine order in Portland and spent the night with his old friend from his first tour in Beijing. He said, I had a great visit with David and Bowl. Then we went to Chelan to celebrate his cousin's 70th birthday, where he met most of his relatives. I wasn't going to go because we have a needy husky, Misha. Rob insisted that I should go. Then that became our last family trip. Tim's high school lacrosse team's championships game, Top Gun movie with Tim, Mariners game, and saw a Japanese two-way player, Otani. He did a lot in the last month, especially. On June 19th, we celebrated Father's Day. I made his favorite pecan pie, and he grilled the spare rib. He opened 2,000 bundle, so I asked, are you sure to open that bottle for spare ribs? Rob said, oh yeah, it's Father's Day. We all enjoyed the meal, and he had a blast when he opened the card from Tim. There was a password for his college, which Rob has been asking for a year. Finally, I can access your grade anytime. He was so happy that night. Tim had him listen to a funny rap song about saving money. He really liked it and said, I should send this to Craig. Later that night, Tim heard him listening to that song again in his bedroom. The next day, he was going to work and then go jogging. He was wearing the brand new T-shirt which I just gave him on the Father's Day. I said to him, are you going to jog with the brand new T-shirt? And he replied, ダメですか? Which means, do you have a problem with that? With a big smile. That was our last conversation. When Tim and I went to the place where Rob collapsed, we finally understood. It was his favorite trail with the ocean and Mount Rainier view. How could he pick the perfect view spot to die? He really had a great 8 years in Bashan. I still remember last summer him saying, life is good in Bashan, while drinking wine and looking at the sunset over the Olympics. While I was waiting for Rob that day, I was worried something might have happened to him, and looked outside. It was a beautiful sunset, and I took a picture. I think Rob was saying goodbye to me at that moment, and gone with the wind. Rob, Luke Sam, Lauru, Luker. Lately, you have been worried about how this country is going. Now you are in the peaceful place. I'm joining you later, but not so soon. Sorry. I'm going to see Tim graduating from college. You only met 2 of Tim's girlfriends, but I'm going to meet more and see him getting married, maybe, and having children, maybe. Tim is thinking of studying finance or business, so he will manage my finances soon, I hope. When Tim was born, we hoped him to be a good US and Japanese citizen and an honest taxpayer. He is now. He is on the right track. I take Misha for a playdate with Reggie. I guess I have to deal with the cable company and the insurance company all by myself. What about 1,500 bottles of wine? You left. Well, that shouldn't be a problem. I will open some bottles from a cellar today. I am surrounded by your family, neighbors, and friends. Tim and I, Misha, will be fine. In Buddhism, your spirit is still here for 49 days. Tomorrow is the 49th day. So we will let you go. Drink wine there and watch us. Arigato. Sayonara. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends, family, and guests. I'd like to thank you for being here. As Ashley Montagu once said, the idea of man is to die young as late as possible. And I'd like to think that my father, Robert Luke, embodied that to the fullest. Dad could never get enough of nature. In his retirement years spent on Vashon, he enjoyed hiking and jogging through its trails and taking our dog Misha on runs. When he got tired of that, he would go out on his kayak and scuba dive right off the island. He even caught some crab for us sometimes, though I don't think he was supposed to. And when the colder months rolled around, nothing brought him more joy than hitting the slopes and gracefully shooting down the mountain. When he wasn't taking in the outdoors, he spent his time scouring wine websites, reading his favorite books on his favorite chair on the garage roof, or listening to tracks from his favorite bands and players. He always had a love and passion for music, and that stayed with him till the end. At age 68, it was not uncommon for my dad to perch up on the couch, facing the beautiful ocean view, and strum his guitar. Dad always moved through life like he was moving with a purpose, and he did. When he sought out to do something, he did it. Like when he was painting the house and forced me to help him. He served his country with a distinguished career as a State Department diplomat, becoming the youngest consul general ever in Okinawa. And in his time in the Foreign Service, he received many commendations, including some from the presidents. And his career was full and accomplished, just like his life. Dad, for the most part, was a pretty agreeable guy, except when it came to differences in opinion and politics. To that end, he was a cannon. And he always could be a little stubborn, so much so, in fact, that he broke his back skiing and refused to go to the hospital until the next day. And though he wasn't a big jokester, he enjoyed a good laugh and gag gifts. At cousins Chris and Kathy's 70th birthday party, he brought a nice wooden box which appeared to have a fine classic wine inside. It was quickly found out that what was inside was only the greatest liquor known to man, chartreuse. He really loved to spend time with family, whether it was the next family skiing trip or going out to Chelan. There was always a family event he was looking forward to. He also did his most to prepare me for what lies ahead. He taught me the way the world works, differences in governments, and what was a good career path and what wasn't. I guess he wasn't a fan of being a professional gamer. But not only did he prepare me for what the world had to offer, but also taught me how to move through life with dignity, kindness, and humility, and the importance of family. It is those core values that made him who he was and is shaping who I will become. In addition to that, he also taught me how to be cheap. Sorry, frugal. I want to remember the great man that he was, and as we all come gathered here in celebration of his life, I hope we can all strive to be the person he was, a kind and decent person, a man who lived like there is no tomorrow, a great husband, great father, the best anyone could ask for. I know that he will forever be with us, watching over. Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to invite anybody to come up and share stories with us. Don't be shy.
Hello, my name is Peter Early. I've known Rob for over 50 years now, and I just want to echo a lot of what Tim and Yumi were saying about him. He's a wonderful, kind, great guy. One of the things I always enjoyed most about Rob was his infectious laugh. He had a great laugh, great sense of humor. He also had a real adventuresome spirit, and I had the privilege of going on a couple of different trips with him. One was to Africa, and another one was to Mexico. I just wanted to recount a couple of examples of his adventuresome spirit when we were in Africa. So we started out, we just had a mountain tent, just the two of us, and we went off to Masa Mara Game Preserve, which has lions and water buffalo and baboons and stuff. So we get to this fancy lodge, and there's signs all over the lodge saying, you have to be in at night, you know, rifles, we have rifles at the ready in case any animals come into the camp. So, you know, be careful. Rob goes, let's just camp over there outside the camp, like, you know, a couple hundred yards away. There's no problem. There are baboons up in the trees. Oh, the baboons won't hurt us. So we're out there. I've never had a more sleepless night. I mean, these animals are coming. There's nothing like being in a mountain tent and having big paw prints coming right around your tent the whole night. So, you know, it's sleepless night one. And then a couple nights later, we went to another park, Aberdares Park, which is up in the Kenyan highlands. And, well, this time we decided, well, we're going to build a fire to keep the animals away. So we built this fire, and we looked around the campfire, and we saw these pairs of eyes all around the campfire looking at us. Except for what was most troubling, Rob goes, look at that pair of eyes. Look at that. There's only one eye there. And I said, oh, my God, the eyes are like this far apart. It's like, oh, now we're in trouble now, you know. So we ended up, we feverishly kept the fire going the whole night. But Rob was fearless about it. It's no problem. So then we went to a third game preserve, Samburu, which had lots of lions, known for having lots of lions everywhere. And so Rob's idea that night was, well, let's cook some steak. And they said, well, Rob, what about this? Isn't the steak being a problem with the lions around? No, it's not a problem. Let's stick the steak. We'll put the frying pans in the car, and we'll lock the car up, and then we'll sleep again a couple hundred yards away. No problem. Well, again, another sleepless night. You know, Rob's just totally fearless. It's like, you know, no problem. You know, it's like, aren't you afraid? He's like, you know, he's like, no worries. So then we stayed there, and the last thing we did, we were in a rush to get home, and I had a plane flight the next day or something out of Nairobi, all the way up in northern Kenya near Somalia. And Rob goes, well, we got to stay awake for this ride. I said, what? We got to stay awake. We need something to energize ourselves. What do you have in mind? He goes, well, let's buy some khat, which is this stuff that the Somalis chew to stay awake. And so let's go find some khat. And it's like, well, okay, fine. We're going to stay awake in this ride with chewing this stuff. So we go to this little camp, and Rob goes in, and the people start thinking we're there to buy trinkets. So they start showing us these little wooden dolls and like baskets. And Rob's, no, we wanted that stuff. We want that over this big barrel, this bale of like this leaf stuff. And the people thought it was hysterical. They're like, you know, this you're crazy, but go ahead. So anyway, we ended up getting the khat, coming back to Nairobi, and I get back. And I said to Rob, he goes, man, this car is like, it's a per mile. We didn't get like unlimited mileage. It's per mile. And Rob goes, well, some of my friends, he was in the UN environmental program. This is in his years between his years at Woodrow Wilson. And he said, some of my friends told me how to solve that problem. I said, what's that, the cheap thing? He says, I disconnected the odometer. so it's like, so we drove all over Kenya, and so with no odometer in the car. He goes, no problem. I said, well, you got to get the goddamn car washed before you bring it back. I think it was beat to death, the whole car. So anyway, so we ended up going back. But I have other stories. I go on and on with these stories about Rob and these ideas he'd have. But he was great. He was great fun to travel with, and I really, I'm going to sorely miss him. I miss the shared memories we had, and anyway, he's a true friend, and I know other friends of ours who traveled a long way to be here with you guys, but he's been a wonderful person to know, and I'm sorry we've had to be under these circumstances, but I'm glad we were able to celebrate his life this way. So thank you.
So I'm the cousin who got the bottle of chartreuse. And I don't appreciate him cutting out before I had a chance to re-gift it back to him. First memory of Rob is a fishing trip that's been sort of immortalized in the Luke family, but Rob was still in diapers? Yeah, so it's probably not a memory. It's probably more a recollection of a picture. But I didn't meet Rob again until he was about 16. I was probably 17. And he was on one of his adventures with a buddy. And they were out driving around the country, and they came up to the Northwest. And so this kind of awkward Luke from the Eastern Lukes presented himself, and I decided, all right, I guess I'll show him around. So we took him out to Mount Rainier, and he and his buddy enjoyed that, and then they went on their way points elsewhere. I don't really remember where else they went to, but I like to think that maybe the trip to Mount Rainier got hooks in him about Pacific Northwest. And we were thrilled, but he settled out here. Kind of gave us a tie back to the other Lukes so far across the country. And he was particularly nice to my father. His dad had passed, and he loved Dad as much as we did. So, thank you, Rob.
My name's Eric. Rob was a good friend of mine. I knew him from a little different world than most of you, State Department, all that. Rob was a lifeguard with me and my friend Michael back here and a few others, and with Tim. And he was a great guy, a great friend. Oftentimes we would set up early in the morning. Rob would usually come in a little cranky. But if you got him talking politics, man, he woke up really quickly. Inevitably, the conversation always came back to family. Tim, he was so proud of you. And Yumi, he loved you so much. The way I'll remember Rob is he was known for one thing when we did laps, and that was doing butterfly. You've all seen it, like this. And if you were in the lane next to him, if you weren't careful, he'd slap you on the top of the head when you were swimming. Rob, thanks for your friendship, and thanks for your sense of family.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Boughton, and I don't have a lot of funny stuff to say, frankly. Rob was a very, very good friend of mine in college, and I loved the guy. And we had a lot of things in common. And I was just thinking about my first meeting with the man. I went over to see an acquaintance, like the first or second day that I was at Williams College. And I walked into Rob's suite. And the first thing I noticed is that one of his suite mates had written, "War, it is axiomatic that war is fought by belligerents," on the ceiling. And I thought, what have I gotten into here? But Rob was in his room. He was in the back room listening to an album by the Byrds. He was listening to a bootleg album by the Byrds, and the Byrds happened to be my favorite band. And I'm a huge Byrd fan to this day. And I think Rob was too. But I never heard this album, so I went into his room, sat down, and we talked, and I think that we were friends forever after that. It's just amazing. And he was involved with a lot of firsts for me, and one of them, I forgot to mention maybe that I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Vermont in Burlington. And Rob was there when I first visited Burlington, along with Pete, who was just speaking a minute about the African adventures. We were going up just before final exams to see the Byrds at the University of Vermont, and everything was just doing great until the car broke down and the radiator fan left its shaft. It flew into the radiator and caused all of the fluid to come out of the car at about 2 a.m. in Montpelier, Vermont. And if any of you have been in Montpelier, although it is the capital of Vermont, it is a very small, quiet, and empty town at 2 a.m. Another important thing about Rob for me is that he talked me into taking my first course in learning theory. I was a psych major. Rob was a mathematics major. But he had taken this course, and he said, you know, you should take that course, Mark. And I said, oh, what the heck? And I did. And it basically turned out to be the field that I wound up getting a PhD in, and am now teaching, and have written textbooks and things in this area. And yeah, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, Rob did that, right? Rob, he was an intellectual omnivore, I think, and a very, very powerful guy. And there were lots and lots of stories. Someone mentioned the classical composer John Cage in a conversation recently. Rob and I would stay up late some nights and play on a baby grand piano in one of the rooms I would try to play something on the keyboard, and Rob would stand over the back and pluck strings and stroke and massage, make these incredible sounds. It was just amazing. We had a blast, all inspired by John Cage's prepared piano pieces. Anyway, I just wanted to say how much I appreciated the man. He was, I think he was a Renaissance man. You think about what he did. He was a mathematician who introduced me to a field of experimental psychology. He had a great career in the Foreign Service. He lived in some of the world's most amazing and interesting places. He spoke Chinese, Japanese, German, and French. And he was a diver and a lifeguard and a great father and a great husband. And I don't know, I just wanted to talk about that. I really appreciated the man, and I really hope that he understood how much I loved him. And thank you.
My name is Derek, and I worked with Rob up at the pool. And I'm really bad in these situations at getting emotional. It's something I inherited from my mom. So I'm going to try to not break down, but forgive that when it happens. I wasn't gonna read this at all today. I was going to give it to Ayumi, but Eric inspired me to come on up and just read it. It's a letter that I wrote this morning, right after I got back from a jog that I took, because it seemed like the right thing to do. So just a little background. I've only known Rob maybe like 5 years. I work up at the pool, do the mechanical stuff. It's just a job that I took because my daughter is a swimmer. And part of what I wrote here is one of the things we connected over was family. It's just seemed like that was just, we talked about two things, music and family. And that's really what brought us together. Like, I wouldn't have that job if it wasn't for my daughter being on the swim team, and they needed somebody to do the job, so I did the job. And that's how I met Tim. I never would have met Tim or Ayumi. But life just does that, right? It brings you together with, like, people that you just never knew that you needed to know. And he was one of those guys for me, so I wrote this letter. And it says, Ayumi, I've spent much of the past several weeks going back over the time that I was fortunate enough to spend with Rob. We were only friends for maybe the last 4 years, but I will always consider him one of the best friends I've been blessed with in my life. I tend to see things through only two lenses, family and music. Rob could see the world more like a kaleidoscope, with all of its colors and its nuance. But when it came to the shades of family and music, at least, our palettes overlapped, and he was willing to indulge me in conversation. The first meaningful conversation I had with him, of course, revolved around music, specifically who the first band was that we ever saw live. I told him the first show that I saw was U2, 1987, Joshua Tree Tour. I said I would have done anything to see them or Big Audio Dynamite in 1985, but my folks said that I couldn't go to a show until I was 15 years old. Who's Big Audio Dynamite, he asked. I said they were the band which was formed by Mick Jones after he left The Clash. Rob says, I love The Clash. I was like, we're brothers. From that day forward. Okay, moving on. Turns out, Rob's first show was a 1970s jazz fusion ensemble known as Mahavishnu Orchestra. Okay. Yeah? All right. All right. Okay. Okay, so then it was my turn. Who the hell is Mahavishnu Orchestra? I asked dumbly. What? He erupted. He went on to explain I can't read this, it's so small. The intricate precision that these guys had and their mind-blowing, unique nature of their music. I went home and looked them up on YouTube and gave them a listen. Like all jazz music, I thought it was rubbish. But Rob's passion on the matter opened the floodgates to our friendship, and within weeks, I had him attending New Jersey's punk icons, Titus Andronicus, with me, and we had a blast. So, this morning I went on a jog, and I decided it was only fitting that I listen to Mahavishnu Orchestra and gave him another chance. It still sounded like garbage to me. But I get it now. Rob had the ability to hear the whole thing. Jazz is the musical kaleidoscope, and Rob could hear all the colors, where I just heard the noise. That was his gift. Secondly, and more important thing that Rob and I often spoke about was family. I'm not sure I've ever heard a father more proud of a son. Lacrosse, Tulane, Japanese. Even the time I ran into you guys at the ferry dock late at night, and you had just gotten back from the shooting range. That next day, Rob was just like in awe of the man that Tim was becoming. And it just, I don't know, that choked me up that day too. So, the other thing I remember most is the time I pushed him on how you, Ayumi, and Rob met and fell for each other. He told me how he invited you to the office, and it was to try to impress you. I had forgotten that detail, but when you told me the story, I was like, that's right. I wrote here, I'm sketchy on the details, but I do remember him getting very, very quiet when he said to me, man, she was so beautiful and so out of my league. I'm not sure what I did to deserve her. I'm so sorry that his time was cut short. I wanted him to be in my life another 20 years. I figured if anything, a life maybe back in Japan or elsewhere would be the thing that would take him away. Thank you for letting me share with you a little of why I love the man, and thank you for sharing him with the rest of us. That's all. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Owen. I used to live here for quite some time, and during that time, I was blessed with knowing Ayumi and Tim and Rob, and I just wanted to fill in one more facet of his life that so far hasn't really been covered, and that is his amazing ability on skis. We went skiing one time, and the first time I skied with him, and the first run was sunny and ice. And I could do okay on ice, but Rob was just like it wasn't even there. After that, it was all fog and ice. And he didn't need to see the surface, which sort of relates to the last comment about jazz. You know, he could feel it. And it was amazing how he did that. So the second time I went skiing with him, at Stevens Pass, not my choice, too long a drive. And same thing, there was ice. There was not much sun. But what he did tell me that was important was that he could no longer wait for Tim. Tim had to wait for him. In other words, Tim was a better skier than he was at this point, which is truly impressive, you know, because Rob's a hell of a skier. And he was gracious enough to take me along a couple of times.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Parker. And I was another college classmate of Rob. Rob and I were roommates our sophomore year. I was prompted to get up to talk about a story about friendship, but I have to begin by saying that I've heard both John McLaughlin and John McLaughlin and John Cage mentioned tonight. And Rob and I got along very well as roommates our sophomore year. But those were two musicians whose music I just could not abide. And you spoke of hearing the noise rather than the music. I'm another one, I guess, who heard the noise. But I wanted to tell a story about friendship. I taught for many, many years at a boarding school in Central Virginia, just outside of Charlotte, 35 miles from Charlottesville, in the metropolis of Orange, Virginia. Now, if you've never heard of Orange, Virginia, you have lots of company. It's a tiny little dot on the map. But there's bus service that runs from Washington down through the Virginia countryside, winds through Orange and into Charlottesville. And Rob was back in D.C., I don't know why, on some official function. This would have been the mid-'80s, I guess. And he had my address, and somehow he tracked down my phone number. And out of the blue one day comes a phone call, said, "I'm in D.C., can I come down and pay you a visit?" Yeah, sure. Sounds great. I hadn't seen him in quite some time. So with all of D.C. at his doorstep, where he had any number of things he could have chosen to do of culturally enriching quality, he chooses instead to hop on a bus and ride for 2 hours through the Virginia countryside to Orange, Virginia, and came to stay with me and my wife. And he spent a night. We didn't do anything special, just catching up on news, probably killed a bottle of wine or two and had dinner together. And then the next day I drove him back to D.C. But I found myself pondering that here's a guy who knows what he could have been doing in D.C., of all sorts of interesting and notable types. And he chooses to track down his old college roommate and ride down to Orange, Virginia, and spend a night. And to me, that's the epitome of a friend, the person who does not the easy part of friendship, but who's willing to go the extra mile to make a friendship work. That was Rob. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sara, and I'm from Tokyo, Japan. I have the great privilege of having served under the leadership of Mr. Luke, but I've only known him in a professional capacity during the time he was the political minister counselor for the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. I particularly remember the time that Japan was hit by one of the worst natural disasters in recent decades, which was the triple disaster, you might recall, on March 11th, in 2011. He was the head of a political section, which is the third in line at a large U.S. embassy. And he handled the issue very professionally, of course, and dispatched a group of Marines to the affected areas and restored the local Sendai airport in a matter of 2 weeks. It was all under his direction and the then Ambassador John Roos that made that happen. And I just wanted to say that I've worked with many colleagues in Foreign Service, but he was one of the few that really stood out to me in my memory. And hearing about all his personal stories and just how incredibly dedicated he was to his family, Ayumi-san and Timothy, was just really a touching story for me to learn. And also today I learned that it was Ayumi-san who taught him the art of the Japanese bowing and other cultural protocols to help him and become such a successful diplomat in Japan. And there's always a great woman behind great men. but I do miss him dearly, and but I appreciate the opportunity to share his memory today. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Gorjantz. I had the pleasure of having Rob as my supervisor when I served in Paris at the U.S. mission to the OECD. What struck me about his leadership was that he let his team go about their business, and he trusted us to do what we needed to do, and if we needed advice, he was there. But he was not an intrusive boss in any way. And I also appreciated very much that he went swimming every day at lunchtime, which to me was an example that you didn't often see in our business, where we sat at our desks and stuffed tuna fish sandwiches down our faces because we couldn't break away. And I appreciated that he had that sense of balance in his professional life. But what I most remember is the joy when he and Ayumi were expecting, and that just touched me because they really wanted to be parents. And now to see Tim and how he has grown up is just a blessing. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Luke. I'm one of the West Coast cousins, and I just wanted to share a little story about Rob. I'm a dog person, and when he first kind of came over, he was much of a, I would say he was a cat person. And so I think I might have had a little part to play in him becoming a dog person. So Ayumi and Tim had spent a lot of time on working him over, trying to talk him into allowing them to get a dog. And Rob would always kind of ask questions and, you know, what kind of dog and that kind of thing. And they kept working and working at it. And I understand, because I'm also really resistant to, you know, bringing in a dog. You know, I think that's because they already have so many, but also you know that you're going to fall for the companion. And so anyway, one day you get a phone call and they say, oh, we got a dog and we got a husky. And I went, oh my, that's not the easiest dog to have with, you know, for your first dog. And then I got, you know, kind of the ask to come over, because I do dog training. So I said, yep, be right over. So I came over and we spent the day, and Tim and Rob for 8 hours listened to me in a marathon monologue. I downloaded everything I knew about dogs, and I just knew that it was all going to be okay, because of the way he was so committed, and also his heart was into it. And I think he really did, you know, become a full dog man and loved Misha, and so that was his becoming a dog person. But also, you know, Rob fit into everyone's family like a brother. He was passionate, compassionate, fun-loving, generous, and supportive, qualities we all aspire to, but he had seemed to have achieved. This was so hard to reconcile, but he seemed to be called up, taking pieces of our heart with him to continue his work, and that is needed elsewhere. We'll miss you, Rob.
Hi, my name's Mike O'Connor. My wife Nancy and I know Rob through skiing. We skied with him for the past 3 years, and listening to these stories makes me realize that Rob skied the way that he lived. He was a fearless skier. We did some pretty hard stuff, pretty much expert slopes all day, and Nancy and I love to do that stuff, but we're kind of careful. We go a few turns and then we'd stop and think about it, look at the view maybe, and Rob would just fly down the mountain. And, excellent skier. But sometimes I'd watch him, I'd be like, is he going to be okay? He's just cruising down these double black slopes. But he always was okay, and I just realized that he skied the way he lived. He embraced life and all it had to offer, and he just went for it. And that's maybe a good lesson for all of us. So we really enjoyed skiing with him, enjoyed the 2 to 3 hour drives to the mountain with him, learned about his life and his love for his family. He talked about Tim and Naomi quite a bit. And I, guess he was very interested in cooking too. We learned that as well. He got us interested in it as well. So he will be missed. Thank you.
I'm the oldest brother of the Western cousins, and I can remember when my parents came back from Europe in 1955, we stopped, or his father came and got us at the airport and took us back home, not knowing that I had the mumps. And we gave Rob and everybody the mumps, and we were on quarantine. Later on in years, my dad told me that Rob was coming out and they couldn't meet with him, so he asked me if I could meet Rob and Naomi and take them, show them around Seattle. And so I set up this trip, or this trip to the a Russian submarine that was out here. And I also took them to the Air and Space Museum that was fairly new at the time. And we took Timmy down to the Russian submarine, and we showed him around, and I was taking pictures, and we finally got to the museum, and I was taking a picture of Tim in a cockpit. I don't know what it was. Anyway, I ran out of memory in my camera, so I hit delete to get rid of a few, and it deleted all the pictures. I remember talking to Rob after he got out of high school at his house in 1970. And that was the first time I had a chance to have a talk with him. And I've enjoyed his time here, and I'll miss him.
I'm the spouse of the oldest brother, and when they were young and they visited back east to the family, they got to go fishing more than once, but they have a picture of the 4 or 5 of them lined up beside the car and this big string strung between them holding all these fish. And the older kids are all standing there, and Rob is sitting on the ground with his hand in his diaper pants. So 5 years ago, when we all got together over here to celebrate Richard's birthday, we did a reenactment. And he was in it, hook, line, and sinker. He wore these little tiny shorts. And we all posed with fake fish, of course, but it was a blast. It was so fun. We laughed so hard. And he just got such enjoyment out of it.
At this time, we're going to invite Richard up to give a thank you and an invitation. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the family for allowing us, Island Funeral Services, to take care of your family, to be here for you today. It's truly an honor, and we'll continue to keep you all in our thoughts and prayers. Richard.
Thank you very much. I'm Rich, Rob's older brother, and you can't imagine how much we appreciate you all coming out. And I'm telling you, I learned an awful lot today that I knew nothing about. I think this is sort of an indication of how families sometimes don't get as much out of each other as other people get out of them. Our parents sent us off to camp when Rob was born so that they could concentrate on things without having to worry about figuring out what our reaction was going to be to this newborn. So we finally got home and were introduced to him. And Annie immediately kicked the bassinet and, basically didn't want anything to do with him. He was taking over. He was the youngest. So anyway, the thing with Rob was that he was constantly nowhere around. I mean, he was always overseas. He was, really, it was very difficult to figure out what he was up to and try and follow his life. We were incredibly proud of him he just accomplished amazing things in his career and in his life, but we didn't get to participate in it a whole lot. We did, one thing that I'm so thankful for is that he brought Ayumi and Tim into our lives. I think our first really nice visit with the two of them was in Paris. They were over there in this really fabulous apartment almost on the Champs-Élysées, and they said, you really need to come over and take advantage of this. And we thought, well, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. So my wife and daughter and I, the 3 of us, flew over, and we spent about actually the last 3 weeks of their stay in Paris with them. In fact, there were realtors coming in and measuring for new drapes for the next document while we were there. But we got a nice vacation. In the middle of the vacation, we went down to Sicily for 3 or 4 days and had a really fun time. And the one thing I remember is Rob pulling out bags and bags of cheese out of the refrigerator. He had bought all of these varieties of cheese from all over France, and then he sat down and he actually had a cheese guide, kind of a sheet of paper with all of the varieties of cheese and where they were produced in France. And he and my daughter and I would sit around and eat cheese every night. The whole 3 weeks we were there, just going through all of these different cheeses, and they were phenomenal. I mean, I've never had such a good variety of cheeses. So we had a really nice visit with Ayumi, and Tim was running around and couldn't have been more than 2, maybe even younger than that. And they were trying to get all their stuff together to get moved. I can't even remember where you were going next, maybe to Tokyo or something. But this was sort of indicative. We would catch him between assignments. We'd find him up in Newport, Rhode Island, or we'd find him down in D.C., and occasionally they'd come through Columbus, Ohio, which is where we live. But it was just these little snippets of visits, and then he was off to somewhere else. And hearing all your personal stories about him, it just really, just so touching, I think, for us. But really the last time I saw Rob was at this infamous reenactment of the fishing deal where he was crawling around in his diaper, you know. I mean, truly a fabulous reenactment of him as a 2-year-old or whatever he was when this picture was originally taken. So that was a celebration of my 75th birthday, and that was the last time we saw him. And my wife really wanted to be here, but she's in the middle of a bunch of dental surgery that requires her to have very well laid out appointments where she has to go to see the surgeon, go to see the cosmetic dentist and everything. She just couldn't make it. She's very, very unhappy that she wasn't able to come out. But just to wrap this up, probably the best time I had with my brother was Ayumi and Tim had taken off from D.C. to travel out here to get settled in Seattle. Rob had retired from the State Department. They had 2 cars, so they needed to drive both cars cross country. So he was going to drive the Toyota, which, believe it or not, still is in the garage at their house. It was a kind of a piece of junk when we drove it across the country, but actually it was one of the best cars I've ever driven. It had, it looked like nothing, but it had fabulous pickup. So he drove from D.C. up to Columbus, picked me up, and we headed out. We stopped in Chicago to spend the night with a Williams friend of his. We then went to Madison, Wisconsin, and went into the Capitol and saw all the trash that was left when they were mad at Scott Walker. And then we went and stayed in Minnesota and went to the Spam Museum. And I don't know whether any of you have been to the Spam Museum, but this was one of the highlights of the trip. And then we went down into a Minuteman silo. So this is typical Rob, the kinds of things you guys have been talking about. So we're down in the bowels of the South Dakota terrain, getting a lecture on how the Minuteman program worked and potentially how close we were to nuclear war and all this other stuff. So, and then we met the Grovers, which are they are cousins and sons and daughters of my dad's oldest sister, Aunt Irene. We told them we were coming through on the way across country, and geez, they all came from all over Utah and Idaho to meet us at the Chuckarama for, for a big buffet, you know, and it was really fun to catch up. Mark is here, Mark Grover, he's the representative of that side of the family. We really appreciate him coming out. And the amazing thing is that that entire trip, I mean, we are absolute political polar opposites. I mean, we couldn't discuss politics without strangling each other. I mean, it was that bad. We managed to drive all the way across the country and survived that trip unscathed. And we ended up delivering him to Ayumi and Tim, and then I hopped a plane back to Columbus. But that was really the first opportunity I had had to really spend some time with him, because, like I say, he was hopping all over the world all the time. And of course, I was married and we had jobs. We lived in Kansas and we lived in Pennsylvania. You know, we weren't anywhere near DC for the most part. So anytime he would drop back in to spend as little time as possible in DC, we rarely got a chance to come and see him. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming out and honoring his life, for telling such fun and interesting stories about my brother. And we're supposed to have a reception over at the Mukai farm after this, and any of you who are up for it, please join us. There's going to be food and drink and so on. So thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it.
My first warrior, I was so...
I'm glad we could go. Dude, I thought he was just the one who killed him.